Welcome to Drinking with Authors. I am your host, Erica Lance. My co-host today is the amazing Bo Lake. And our guest today for the second appearance on our show is AmyLBernsteinAuthorIG. Woo! Woo! Welcome back, I should say.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back.
Of course. You're so much fun. We love having you. Okay, let's talk about what we're drinking. So I'm doing something a little different. It's in my Tinkerbell mug. And it is coffee, but I put espresso Baileys in as the creamer.
That's delicious.
I'm going to be playing a video game late into the evening this evening, so I needed a little pick-me-up. And so that's what I did here. Bo, what about you?
I am only drinking ice water because I just got back from a 3-mile walk in the 90-degree heat, and I am feeling dehydrated.
Wow, you are a brave soul there.
Yeah.
We're doing the smart thing. That is smart. And I am drinking a very cool, crisp, you can't quite see it, French Chardonnay. And it's the perfect thing for a summer evening.
I love it. I debated wine, but I was like, I gotta be up late. And so
you gotta.
I do. It's a requirement. No, just kidding. It's not really a requirement, but just saying. Okay. So Amy, what have you been up to since last we saw you? What exciting things are happening?
Well, I probably published 6 books or something. No, not really. I have been doing a lot, though. I've been doing a lot of writing. I do have a novel that came out, I think, since we last talked, and maybe we'll get a chance to talk about that one. It's kind of wild and crazy, hard to classify. There is a mermaid in it, which is always a good thing. And I'm also a book coach. So I work with a lot of other writers to help them on their writing journey. And it's something I really enjoy doing.
So let's talk about that for a minute, because that's not something that is, I think it's been mentioned on the show. Well, of course, but Amy, let's talk about what is a book coach. Why would you need a book coach? That sort of thing. Because I think a lot of people don't even realize this is a thing in the world.
Absolutely. It is a thing. And I went through a rigorous certification program that's run by a wonderful company called Author Accelerator. And a lot of people hear the term book coach and they think, well, isn't that just a fancy term for an editor? And it's really very different, because an editor usually just works with a text or a completed text. A book coach will really work with the whole writer as an accountability partner, as a champion for their work, and as someone to really help them kind of get through the thicket and the challenges of trying to structure a book and asking a lot of hard questions and sharing a lot of amazing tools to help that writer sort of find their own way to their best work. It's the kind of partner that you wish every writer had, because writing is so lonely. How do we know we're doing it right?
Well, I think a lot of people wonder if because this ties in with imposter syndrome, because I think a lot of writers think that they've written a great piece of work, and they may have written a great piece of work, but then it goes to go out there and they're not finding whatever they thought was going to happen when they send that book out to the world. And so then they start doubting themselves, going, am I any good at this? Blah, blah, blah. And so what is the situation that's causing that to not go on to the road to success that they feel it is?
So one of the things that's happening is that there's been such an explosion in indie publishing and people able to publish their own work. And while, of course, it's wonderful to be able to control your own creative process, put the work out in the world the way you want to, get the cover, just the way you want it, those are all wonderful things. But what's happening is that sometimes, or oftentimes, a lot of those writers kind of don't have that quality partner to go along this process with them and say, I'm really not sure that the structure that you've got going here is telling your story in the best way. I'm really not sure you figured out your why. Why are you writing this book? I don't know if you understand who your ideal reader is, who's really going to read this book. Point of view, is it consistent? There's so much to master about the craft. And when you work with a book coach, which many writers, do not yet have the chance to do. But when you do have that lucky opportunity, you really are going to have a partner with you who's going to take you through the really tough stuff and make sure that you write something that's really commercially viable. because it's not easy to do. It's not just about words on the page, right? It's all about structure and a lot of other things that go with that.
Agreed. So just on this topic, because we've got to jump to the mermaid here soon, shortly, and everything.
No problem. I can talk about book coaching all day. No problem.
Yes.
I love it.
But
I'm fascinated. Honestly, I'm fascinated.
I see
We
that
could talk
Bo
about
is
this
like
the whole time.
riveted.
I'm riveted.
Yeah, leaning in even like I love
Good.
that. Let's talk about how you find a good coach and a right coach for you, and what are some things to look out for? Because I know some of our listeners are going to go, "That's what I need, a book coach." But
right,
as with everything in the publishing world, you got to know the do's and don'ts before you go down a path, because you can end up having your writing dreams crushed by somebody who says they're one thing, but it's not, doing what they should do.
For sure. There's so much kind of writer beware stuff out there, isn't there? It's true. There's so many different scams and so many people who are ready to take a writer's money because the writer just really wants somebody to solve their problems. So I'm going to just put the plug in because I know it's for real, and I know the integrity of the people who do these works. AuthorAccelerator.com. AuthorAccelerator.com is a fantastic website to begin to check out what a trained book coach really is and what he or she can do for you. And, there really is kind of a book coach for every writer. We have a lot of different styles, and it depends on what that writer needs. I'm certified to work in nonfiction, but, a lot of us also work in memoir and fiction and other kinds of forms of creative nonfiction. And I think that's a great place to start, where you're going to be able to trust the process and the kind of people that you come across. Quite honestly, book coaching is one of those things now where you can practically just randomly Google it, and at least you'll get some folks who pop up. And what you really always want to look for is someone who's going to be very straightforward with you about how they're going to help you become the best writer that you can. They're not going to write the book for you. They're not a ghostwriter who's going to write the book for you. They are not going to be overly prescriptive and tell you this is what you should do, this is what's wrong, this is what's better. They're going to help you go on that journey yourself as a writer, because if you can't figure out how to do your own craft, then you're not really doing yourself any favors as a writer, and neither is that potential coach. So the other thing is that a really good coach has an intake process, and they will take you through some paces to make sure that you're a good fit. And often for a nominal fee, sometimes for no fee, they'll give you feedback on a small number of pages so you can get a sense of the kind of feedback that you can get from someone who's really looking out for your best interests of your work and of you as an author. But yes, you've got to be very careful, do a lot of due diligence on anyone you consider engaging.
I think that's great advice. And I always say, get referrals from that person.
Yes.
Who have they helped, and get them to give you titles that they worked with that have legitimately been published too, because that's another thing. You don't want a coach that actually has never had any work published from people that they've helped, because maybe
sketchy.
Yeah.
Well, it can take a very long, as you know, it can take years until somebody gets that work out there. But for sure, there are, in other words, a lot of my clients are still in the writing phase. Some of them are just tiptoeing up to the, querying in the marketplace phase. It does take a while, but you want to make sure that that coach is really going to be able to work with you as a kind of a whole person and roll together those roles of an accountability partner, a champion, and a genuine coach who can offer you tools and guidance for you to be the best writer that you can.
That's very cool. I think that's awesome. I'm so glad we talked about that, because if you want to write a book, and also if you have the idea to write a book, you can reach out to a coach too and talk to them and have them do some consulting so you really understand what you're getting into. Because, I always say it, that the amount of people that come up to me and go, oh my God, yeah, I'm going to write a book, or I'm in the middle of writing a book, and don't finish.
And then they just go off a ledge because they don't really realize what they're getting into.
For sure, Bo.
They don't know about the business or any of that. They're just like, I'm writing a book. It's very romantic,
Right. It's really such hard work, and you can have enthusiasm for those first 10 or 25 pages, and then you just run out of steam. And, many, many very good books and many talented writers quit too early because they don't have that person to sort of push along with them and say, listen, what you're doing here is really interesting, but what about this? What about that? Have you thought about this? Let's talk about, what does the blueprint for your story really look like, which is one of the key tools that we work with authors. Now, I work with a lot of nonfiction authors, and I love nothing more than helping somebody with a really interesting idea, sort of take that idea all the way through to being an actual book proposal with like real meat on the bones. It's a very exciting process. And that's really, really hard to do on your own.
Oh, I agree, especially too if you're trying to tell your story like a memoir type thing or something like that, because you have the stories, but even some of the best storytellers you sit down and listen to aren't necessarily the best writers to piece the whole thing together to take
That's
the
right.
reader through the story. Because
Mhm.
at the core of anything, you have to be a good storyteller because your reader needs to keep wanting to run through what you're telling them and not stop. I mean, that's all of our goal, I suppose.
Right. And what a lot of people don't realize when you mention memoir, many people don't realize that a memoir is a lot like really good fiction. It's a story that's told that uses time in interesting ways with, time moves forward, but then there are also flashbacks. There has to be a really clear point to the story. There has to be a journey of transformation for the person telling the story. So a lot of the things that we think of that make a great novel also make a great memoir. And it's not just like sitting down and writing, what happens on day one and going up to day 1000 and doing this kind of in order. That's often not the best way to tell that kind of story. So structure, structure, structure. It's really all about how we put the pieces together.
That it's so true. It is so true because yeah. And, I often say this when people are talking about writing even historical fiction, where they're writing about somebody in a situation. But even if you're doing a semi-autobiographical thing and referencing it, you don't know every single conversation. And even if we're remembering back to something, some conversations have impact, but other situations, you don't necessarily remember the exact room, everything like that. So you have to go and I feel like even memoirs, nonfiction, that type of thing has fiction in it because nobody was standing in Abraham Lincoln's office when he was talking to somebody to hear exactly how the conversation went, unless it's written down or something. You're going to have to make up the gist of what was described in that conversation. So that's fascinating. Okay, mermaids, Amy, tell me about the mermaids.
I was going to say, we need to talk about mermaids now.
Yeah.
So talk about the biggest transition of all time, right? So this book that I wrote, which is again probably not going to show up because I've got a screensaver on, but I'm poking it up into the sweet spot just a little bit. Let's see, I had it there for a minute.
It's behind your head, so we
can
can't
see it behind your head. Yeah,
it's behind my head. You are right. So so Dreams of Song Times. This is I've worked so hard to, one of the things you've got to do is figure out how to classify your novel, right? So it's about a mermaid who's full of secrets, on the run, and ready to risk everything for a future she never saw coming. But that's the log line, and that's not even the story. And so what I did is I mashed up, I love crossing genres and mixing them up together. So, this is a little bit of a socio-political thriller. It's a little bit of a damsel in distress. It's a coming of age tale. It's someone who's being hunted to the brink of extinction. There's a tremendous amount in here about the disappearance of species from the planet, including many, many, many endangered indigenous human populations all over the world. So I wrap all this up in a story about this young human mermaid hybrid who basically has to make her way in a very dangerous world where she's treated like an outsider and she's trying to find her place and has a lot of secrets to hide. It's full of like almost everything. There's a little bit of sex, there's a little bit of violence, there's some sad stuff, there's some fun stuff, there's some being chased and in danger stuff, and like a little of everything, which is why I have so much trouble classifying it.
Well, I was going to say, Amy, you're kind of famous or infamous for this genre, like cauldron of genre-ness. that is just where you create. And I remember that from the last time, believe it or not, even though I think Bo doesn't think I remember anything after these podcasts. It's fine. It's fine. A lot of judgment over there. But
I didn't say anything.
I know.
Sitting quietly.
Yeah, you don't have to say anything. The looks. But I think it's fascinating because none of your books are in a same thing. Like that's not what defines you as a writer, Amy, at all. So where did the idea for this come from?
The idea began with a joke or a challenge to myself, but then it became something serious that I worked on really hard. And I did you'd be surprised how much research I did for a book about mermaids. So quick aside, I'm going to answer your question. I did such a deep dive into mythology and folklore about mermaids all over the world, not because I was going to really be recreating that, but because I wanted some texture and some background to my story. And I have this little kind of meta thing going on where my heroine, Elle Gossamer, who's a human mermaid hybrid, is trying to discover her own origins because she's all alone in the world. I'm not going to explain why. And she's doing this deep dive into these ancient books that I made up that are all about mermaids. But then there's all this stuff. So it's like, it's all made up, but then there's real folklore from real cultures. But of course, they made it up too. So I love the meta levels of this. It's like the real stuff that was made up inside a book that's all made up. And the lore is inside books that are made up. Anyway, it's kind of, I love the head spinning. But like that. But it's not complicated. It's easy to follow. It's just the fun layers of it. So, honestly, this was really some years ago now when I started thinking about it. I follow a lot of agent websites, and I used to follow Twitter a lot. I'm not really doing the Twitter/X thing quite so much anymore, which is another story.
And most people, but yeah.
And agents, agents were always kind of literary agents, always like they're always saying what they want, and it rose to the level of a little bit of a cliche in a way, because some agents were out there saying, "Oh, well, I want a story about dragons who fall in love on the moon, but then they discover oil, and then they have a really big family, and then there's a war." So you get these like kind of peculiarly specific out there things that they say they want. And I'm like, I'm not right. I'm not going to write. This is not what I'm going to write. I'm not going to write this. So I said to myself, almost aloud one day, I just sat there and I said, you know what? I'm going to write some damn book about a mermaid who's a spy, and she does this and she does that. My mermaid is not a spy, but it's still pretty wild and crazy. But you know what? The thing is, the gift that I gave myself is I suddenly allowed myself to just like run free. Okay, let's see where we can push. And I went through a ton of drafts, just a ton. But that's it. I challenged myself.
That's fantastic, though, because there's definitely writing to commercial things and stuff, but I also feel like the agent thing can be such a weirdly fickle situation when it comes to, because the whim changes. Like they may think something, but whether or not the publisher will do it, and whether or not in that moment the publisher will do it, and things can change on the wind. Again, the brilliance of being able to publish yourself as well is you can create stories and stuff like that. If you just want to write to market, you can absolutely do that. But I feel like there's not, you become very formulaic, like Harlequin romance kind of formulaic in books, which is not bad. I mean, people love Harlequin books, like that whole thing, but there's definitely almost a formula to exactly how to write those books, regardless of the characters. And you still have to be a good writer for it to land. But if you don't want that, create what you want to create.
Well, and you're so right. And part of the dynamic, as I'm sure you both are well aware, is that, I think of the whole industry is kind of a funnel where at the tippy, pointy, well, not funnel, think of it as a triangle, but at the tippy point of the triangle, you've got like those big five publishing houses and a couple tiers below that are still really impressive. And they're sort of taking fewer and fewer books. They're closing imprints. They are under so much market and cost pressure that they take fewer and fewer risks. So they need to bet on stuff that seems pretty surefire. So you've got these agents trying to get these publishers interested in books that are increasingly, I mean, not that there isn't great, amazing new literary fiction being put out there that's interesting and risky, but that's a tiny fraction of what's getting through and what's at the tippy tip of the triangle. The thing is, it's just really hard for agents now to sort of sell books to publishers because the economic pressures, the cost of everything's gone up. The publishing industry is consolidating. So no wonder the bottom of the triangle is spreading and getting wider and wider. And that's all the folks who are like, to heck with it. I'm going to write the book I want to write. I'm going to publish it myself. I know I can see where I can market it, and I'm going to go for it. And of course, for some people, that's working out beautifully.
Well, and I think, I would like to jump on the bandwagon of what you just said, sort of dovetail into it, so to speak, is this. Traditional publishers are not training their fucking authors on how to create their platforms and how to market their own books. Mm-hmm. They just hope authors can figure it out.
That's true.
And because we're in such a different place than we were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever, because obviously, 2011 create space and self-publishing, not that it didn't occur before there, but there was a little, like, it started the boom, right?
Yeah.
But you still had traditional publishing sitting on what people want to read. They were making the decisions on what people want to read, right? But now you have all of these self-published authors that figure out and find their niche and then start helping each other figure it out. We have such a radically amazing community that authors are willing to help other authors. It's not like somebody is, keeping it secret and safe and like you don't get to see it. Where I feel a lot of the larger publishers have they're like a giant oil tanker that can't turn themselves around or even notice what's happening. Because I used this example the other day, and when I was talking to somebody about it, they were floored. But we went to a convention, and there was a person who had been picked up by, I want to say HarperCollins, or maybe it was Simon & Schuster, and they published a book, right? He had a backlist of self-published books. They were all young adult. Mm-hmm. They all had a Mexican heroine in them. And his new book, similarly, same thing. It was just a different story. They made him take them all down and then said that he was an emerging author.
That's so interesting, because what I thought you were going to say, the happy version of that story is that the one that one of the big five picked up, they pick up his backlist and they reissue them under their name, which is, which is almost like the Cinderella version of that. That's happening too, but only for a tiny fraction of authors. Just like it's a tiny fraction of authors who self-pub and then sell phenomenally well, and then the big guns swoop in, right? And I think the other thing is again, you well know, so many indie authors have decided that the route to success is to publish in series, because that's how they're going to build a fan base who start buying, so that by book 4, you've got more people buying book 1, 2, and 3, and then everybody's book 4, and it's like a snowball effect. But what I will say about that is I respect it as a strategy, especially as a marketing strategy. Unfortunately, I think it's a real challenge to quality.
No, it can be, but I'll tell you, BookScan, no. It's going to come to me in a minute. There was a lot more Baileys than I thought in that coffee, and it's already in there. It's fine. But one of the statistics that is really interesting that has been monitored for the last 20 years is where do authors generally, not the exception, but the rule, find success? And it's after they have 6 books out. And then true success is after 20 books out. Mm-hmm. And that can be single solitary stories. Like I have a horror author friend of mine, Jeff Strand. He has a couple little micro series, like 3 books, trilogies, but most of his stuff is standalone. He's a horror author, right? But, there's a momentum to doing that. So I don't think, and here's the truth though, traditional publishers aren't taking on series-based authors anymore.
Right.
They're just simply not. Or if they are, they go, well, we'll see how the first one does, right?
Unless you're George R.R. Martin or J.K. Rowling or something like that. But yes, which is why it's so big in the indie world, because you're taking on all the risk yourself. Meanwhile, you're building a fan base.
You are. And the truth is, like, a lot of people forget about J.K. Rowling. We're going to have to take a break. And Bo, I'm sorry this went this way, but you get the first question after the break. But J.K. Rowling, a lot of people don't realize that nobody was interested at all until almost book 3.
That's right.
Like she was, and it was only the, Applied Scholastic Success or whatever, that little thing that went out to all the students that got her going. And George R.R. Martin was a TV writer. He's amazing, but he was a TV writer writing a ton of stuff before he got where he got to. But I agree with you. Like, there are some successes, but if you go back and look at the journey, authors who are listening, to get to that success, very few people walk out the door with the success. If you look at statistics, more of them walk out having to do several fumbles through there, to get to where they are. And I think that's something that you have to be willing to do that, because we all know, and as readers, we finish a book, the next thing we do is, what is the next book by that person? If we liked it, right? And if there's no next book, we're on to whatever else. And if it takes too long for your stuff to come out, you've lost those humans, right? They're gone. You've got to just hope they signed up for your mailing list. But, I talked to an author recently, and they were talking about their books coming out, and it was like a book every 3 years. And I was like, oh my God. Like a book every 3 years, you're going to have to go through a whole new cycle of finding fans again. Because, not that George R.R. Martin hasn't taken his sweet ass time, although, as I've said before, I don't know that I would want to be him and try to write this after what they did to that TV show. So.
And I think too of Diana Gabaldon, or however she says her name, because I am a major Outlander fan, but I will hasten to add, I haven't read a word of her on paper. I'm a major Outlander fan because I discovered it through the series. But talk about, having to like put it all out there.
Oh yeah. Well, and what's interesting is, for friends that have read that, I very much enjoy the show. Hello, Jamie. It's nice to see you.
Yes.
You very much. Yes. But in any show that has that amount of men in kilts, you've got me. I don't even care what the script says. I can mute it. Worst case scenario. But but what's interesting is this was somebody, it wasn't like her first book came out and they gave her a TV show. And if you read the books, they're similar, but they're not the same.
And they seem quite literary. I think I looked at this first several pages of the first one, and there's a lot of, well, we call it info dumping, but in the literary world, it's not info dumping. It's just you're creating a mood, right? So, but they're dense, really, really dense, and so you have to do something different when you're going to bring it to TV. So, and we'll jump back into this, but one thing that gets eliminated from, first of all, she writes historical fiction. That's what that is. And I am not a fan of the historical fiction genre. That's not derogatory, just not a fan, because like, Jane Austen, it takes a long time to get anywhere. And I'm not a trolley kind of girl. I need the pace to be picked up to get moving somewhere. Build suspense, but I don't need to know what made the paint on the damn houses. I don't care. It's not going to make or break my thing. But a lot of people don't realize the biggest thing that you need to do, because I write screenplays and stuff, all of the exposition, just throw it away. Pretty much 99% of the exposition you have in your book, chuck it out the window, because nobody has time for that ever to get to that point. So anyway, with that note, we will take a break and be right back with Drinking with Authors in this very opinionated podcast, which I appreciate. Be right back. Hey, listeners.
You know me, Eric Lance. You're just listening to me in the podcast that you had. But guess what? I'm doing something new.
Yeah, she's joining me, Mark Muncy, the author of the Erie, Florida book series in Erie, Appalachia, and we are hosting a new podcast called Erie Travels.
Woo-woo! Erie Travels, which covers things like ghosts, cryptids, weird stuff, UFOs, men in black, all kinds of fun things that people talk about, and I'm sure you've discussed with friends.
Yep, and you can listen to us on your favorite podcast platform of choice, or find us at erietravels.com and join in the fun and all the spooky goodness.
And of course, Mark, what do we always say?
We'll see you on the other side.
We are back. Bo. Start leading the conversation. No pressure.
So there's always pressure. I feel it on me right now, on my shoulders. You're talking about how you like the mixed genres, and that it's like a big old, Erica said it's like a big old cauldron and you're stirring it up. And Erica brought up a point. She says the genre doesn't define a person as a writer. What does define you as a writer?
What defines me as a writer? It's clear. It's so clear to me now. I couldn't have answered this like 6 or 8 years ago, but I can tell you that I can see what my preoccupations are, and I don't even know what they are until I've written the books. Because I guess I've written, what have I written? 6 novels. Four of them are out there. One is, in submission. One needs a revision. So now I've done it, right? I got the words on the page, right? And I am definitely someone who likes to let readers feel, but to make them think. So I do bring in themes about equality or social justice or, things about politics. And I understand that words like that seem like a big turnoff to a lot of people. But what I want to stress is that those are things that we are dealing with in absolute everyday life by different names. And so it really is about kind of battles between the strong and the weak, who has power, who doesn't, how did they get it, how do you take it from them? It's things of that nature. And I find that those are my preoccupations in novels again and again and again, without being, I don't think, too like heavy-handed or, when I say that there's politics in my novels, there's only one where there's actual quote unquote politics, because politics with a small p is really about power struggles between people, communities, and systems. And you can put all of that in a novel and the reader doesn't even recognize it as such, but I'm thinking about it.
I think it's important what you just said, because there are some books that I think we all read, that we read for the sheer escapism of it. It's kind of like watching Hallmark movies or rom-coms or something. And I don't think a lot of people watch romantic comedies and have some brilliant life lesson learned from it. They're entertained. It's
formulaic and nice. It's like putting on a sweater.
Exactly. But I think it's so vitally important, because I think there are books that you can read that are not blatantly smashing it into your face, but get you to think about it, even if you don't realize you're thinking about it because of the book. But you start, like, I often joke, especially with my kids when they were younger and stuff, because I applied the approach that I wasn't going to tell them what to do. I was going to tell them what happened when I did what they were doing, and then let them make their choice. Because basically, as a parent, you generally end up being right all the time when you do that, just for the record, because when they go and experience it, and a lot of these situations, the same thing happens. Like, I'm not saying every situation, but you go down certain paths, it's a path, right? But I think it's sometimes interesting to give people an analogy or some piece of story, right? Without going, I think you should do X. And then having them have that story resonate and that little voice on their shoulder go, psst. So do you remember that this situation, the best thing to do is XYZ, or this is how you saw a very cool resolution to it? And they might not go, oh crap, that was in Amy's book, but it's there and it sits there like just brewing for the moment.
That would be lovely. But also, Bo, you said something that really just resonated with me a moment ago too, which was, you said, like, when you're reading like genre or whatever, like horror genre, like putting on like a comfortable sweater. My version of that is put the sweater on, but make sure that sweater has really funky buttons. Like do something, right? So like in my paranormal romance, I mean, paranormal romance has a lot of rules and tropes, right, as a genre. But I put all this stuff. I put in all this stuff about like archaeology and the black market for stolen antiquities and how unethical that is. And I did a lot of research. And so like I'm always gonna like be putting this stuff in there that you're gonna so you find yourself thinking, but you're still kind of reading a romance. So I love finding that line to straddle. It's fun.
Yeah, but see, you slightly broke the formulaic thing of paranormal romance, because normally it doesn't have too much depth to it. I love paranormal romance, don't get me wrong. Avid reader. By reader, I mean listening tour of audiobooks, because that's what I do. But there are books that I absolutely pick up because I'm like, oh, this is going to be entertaining and light, and I'm driving and it's going to be great. And then there are other books I pick up going, I know this is going to break me. Prepare, play, you know. So, Amy, before we go into literary briefs, I'm going to let Bo ask a question after I ask this one. But so you have two other books that have not come out yet. What genres are those ones?
Well, one is I'm writing a lot of speculative fiction, and so one of them is, and I also I like to write stuff that's like super topical. Now, let me just say, in publishing, topical, you got to put in quotes, because when you get a traditional publishing deal, you're talking 18 to 24 months, if you're lucky, before the book comes out, and you better hope that it's topical. So, I've got two traditional books out there, which, I think they've held up well enough. But one is about a complete sort of what you might think of as economic breakdown, where the economy breaks and people wind up collecting in tents on someone's very large backyard. It's called Tent City. So it's kind of a breakdown of the U.S. economy and also a breakdown of social order told through, one particular community. That seems pretty topical to me. That's one. The other, I'm even more hesitant to say, because it's out on submission. And so let's just say that I'll just put it. I'll put it like out there like this. What do you think the world would be like if men were the ones getting pregnant? And that's all I'll say about that one.
I don't think we'd have a very populated world. That's what I have to say about that one. Especially if it switched suddenly. Okay, so what are you working on then, Amy?
Well, I've been doing so much hardcore fiction that I'm on a little bit of a, I don't want to say a cleanse, because that sounds like I'm trying to like kind of get rid of something. But what I found is I tried to lean into a new big fiction project right after starting to send my latest book like out of submission. And what I realized is, what it's like, if you exercise too much, it's actually not good for your muscles. So I do write craft essays. I just had a blog on janefriedman.com. She's like one of my favorite people in publishing, because she has so much integrity and puts out so much good content for writers and the whole publishing world. So I had a piece just last week in there about wrestling with first person as point of view. It's the perils and promise of first person. And so I love doing work like that. So, and I also teach a number of workshops, writing workshops. I do bespoke workshops, which is to say, if you can get a group of a minimum of 6 writers together, I will run kind of a masterclass for you on any number of topics. That often goes really well. And I teach for savvy authors, and I've taught for a bunch of other places. And I'm in Maryland, and I'll be presenting at the Maryland Writers Conference and things of that sort. And I love doing that, because I learn so much when we do coursework together. I learn from other writers, and I learn from trying to explain the stuff that we think we all know or want to know. The more you wrestle with it, the better you get at kind of understanding it. So I love doing that kind of thing too. So I'm staying pretty busy, plus my coaching clients.
Wow, I'm just going to say you hit on another topic, and then we're going to literary briefs, and then Bo, you're going to take the questions for literary briefs. I'm not going to stop you, promise. But is community. So whether you're getting a group of people together to have a seminar, all these things you're talking about, writers' conferences, stuff like that, it's community. You've got to make it so writing is not a solo project.
Mhm.
The actual writing is generally going to be solo unless you find a writing partner and you're online, but generally you're both listening to music or something and typing because it's a solo project. I watched a lot of my authors and friends do it. I'm looking at you, Bo. But I think it's important that you have that because you do get better, like watching other people. Even if you're very skilled at a craft, you get better being around other people doing that same craft because everybody has little tricks and tips. Oh my gosh. Wow.
And more motivated too.
Yeah.
You have
More Baileys in your glass.
Like,
It's
what are you
fine.
up to?
I've got one more sip.
I'm sorry, Bo. I didn't mean to talk over you. I'm so sorry.
No worries.
No, repeat what you said, Bo, because I think
basically that if you have another person to talk to, you're more motivated to keep working because especially if they're actually like being very productive, especially if you're a little competitive, you'll want to do more work because they're doing work.
Well, and if I could just briefly, that's one of the things that when you're working with a book coach, they really help you sort of get over those humps and those like discouraging months. You get to the middle of your novel, and I call it the muddle in the middle, and you're like, I don't know what I'm doing. This is falling apart. I can't write this. I think I should just stop. And so having that writing, not a writing partner, because they're not writing, but in that coaching role, they're helping you figure out what the issues are and how you can get through them. And so sometimes it's almost a kind of a therapeutic relationship, but, a lot of writing, we are kind of putting ourselves through a sort of a lot of kind of therapeutic stuff. And so that sensitive coach is really going to help you get through that so that you were doing the writing, but you're not alone in trying to find your way through the process of writing well.
very cool. Very cool. Okay, we're going to literary briefs. Dun, dun. I should probably get the producers start putting music on that.
We need a little theme for it.
Yes, I'm going to make a note. Theme for literary briefs, because if I don't write things down, I'm drunk enough that I'm not paying attention. It's okay. Okay, Bo, it's in your hands. Now remember, Amy's been on the show before, so you have to.
So I gotta have questions.
I flunked this segment before. I just want to remind you of this. So we'll see if I can move from an F to a D. Let's see where we are.
Yeah.
I did see your email about flunking this, and I remember in the email it said that it was your favorite book was the one you flunked.
Yes.
Yes. So can I a quick aside?
No.
Yeah.
I need to know what your favorite book is because I'm assuming you've been thinking about it.
What my favorite? I don't have a favorite book. What happened was favorite book at the time, the Elena Ferrante trio, my Brilliant Friend, and those books. I think when we talked, I was obsessed and I was plowing through all of them, and I couldn't remember the name of the book, probably because I'd been drinking. And so a friend of mine who listened to that podcast said she's yelling at the podcast. She's going, my brilliant friend. I'm like, you mean I really forgot? Did I really forget? So I'm horrified. I can't always like retrieve a name so well. Like I'll remember details, but the name may not come to mind. So anyway, all right. I can be on the hot seat, whatever you need, whatever you want to do with me, just do it.
What is your favorite book right now that you've read in the last, let's say, since you were on last?
So this is going to be a little weird, but I'm back. I was a Victorian literature major in college eons and eons and eons ago. I never lost my love for it. I'm actually reading Henry James' The Golden Bowl right now. And it's the kind of book that no one would get published today, like almost no one. But he had such an original mind as a writer, and I'm fascinated by what he's doing because nobody's doing today. Well, that's probably not true. Somebody probably is doing today. Almost no one's doing today what he did, which is like it's all interior thought. Like 99.9% of the Golden Bowl is interior thought. Not only that, it's interior thought being there from an omniscient narrator. So it's not like you're lodged in a first person interior thought. You have an omniscient narrator giving you the character's interior thoughts and analyzing interiorly what's going on in everybody's brains.
I was gonna say, I mean, that's just sounds. Those are not even words anymore. What's happening over there?
Right? I don't think you'd like it. but you know what? But
I've read it.
yeah, okay. Okay.
I did read it, but I have to say,
did you like it?
No, but not because
Okay.
it's just hard. There was a time I actually liked those kind of books, and it's not, sorry, my doorbell puppies went outside. It's not that. I will say though about that book, he does something that, regardless of the genre you're writing in, right? I write from first person, and I've had a lot of people tell me that, because writing from first person, I don't want to say is dangerous, but you've got to be able to do it, and you've got to be able to do it well, because you can really quickly just be monologuing, for lack of a better word, if you're not smart about how you do it. And he was very, very smart about presenting it where it wasn't monologuing the situation. It wasn't that you weren't drawing the person, because he draws the person into the story. So I'll give it that, even though I'm not be reading it again.
And read my first person piece at Jane Friedman, because I think you'll really enjoy it. Because it gets at what you're saying about not falling into some of the traps. But I will say, on a more contemporary note, I really did like Maggie O'Farrell's last two. Hamnet, and the one after that, I think it's called The Marriage Proposal, but that might be not by the right title. It's funny. On the one hand, I know she's classified as historic fiction. I mean, and she is, but she also, what she does, I find to be so fresh, it almost takes it out of the realm of historic fiction to be just really creative fiction that happens to be set in a different time. I'm making kind of a bit of a distinction there.
I think you're trying to talk me into reading that. It's not going to happen.
I think I am. Yeah.
Amy, not only that, you've managed to create for the second time in a row where your friends are yelling at the podcast because of the book. They're going to be like, "That's the name." I love that. I love that. Okay, Bo, keep going. I'm not taking this away from you.
If you had to recommend only one of your books to somebody, just a random person, which book would it be?
My books are so different that I go by the person, but if I had to simply shove one into their hands, it would be the Potrero Complex, which is a mystery thriller about a journalist who is forced to try to solve the disappearance of teens from a small town. That's the one.
Why?
Because I think there's something in there for almost everyone. If you like mystery thrillers, that's great. But even if you don't, it's not so quote unquote mystery thriller-ish that you can't find other things. And because I said it in a fictional, in the wake of a fictional pandemic, and so it gives you a chance to have a kind of a cathartic experience that's not like coming out of our pandemic, but you're going to bring your own thoughts and feelings to it, which I think is fun for a reader.
Topical.
Topical.
Now I'm like, what questions should I ask? Because I don't know which questions you asked last time, Erica.
Oh, we covered several things, but so Amy, what is one of the most interesting things you didn't realize you had to coach with an author?
Oh, that's a good one.
That had like triple negatives in it. Let's see. The most
it was all first person POV when I said it too. Did you like it?
Interesting things I didn't realize I had to coach with an author.
Like you're coaching authors. There's certain things you go into going, they could get stuck in story and writer's block and imposter. I know there's a list you already know.
Yeah.
But what is something that you went, wow, okay, I didn't know they needed that.
I think the thing that comes up universally again and again is sensing when that writer's self-confidence and belief in their project is failing, and what you can say to them to reignite the spark that they had in the beginning. And when you do that and you see them re-engage with their work at a difficult point, maybe it's research, maybe it's a difficult rewrite, that is a wonderful thing. You really feel like you've helped somebody.
I think that's fantastic. It's one of the things I enjoy the most when I'm talking to people is I jokingly call it sort of the muse aspect, because I don't think a muse is necessarily giving you ideas. The concept was they were there kind of like a coach to help get you to your art being out, right? That's this whole muse thing. And I think it's imposter syndrome is so ugly for authors. It's so,
Mhm.
I mean, I think it's ugly for everyone to one degree or another, right? But authors, like most artists, can easily, with nothing really sparking it, take themselves out of the game. So, okay, Bo, did you come up with a unique question?
I did.
Yay.
What is your guilty pleasure book?
Oh, my guilty pleasure book. I used to read like no one knows who she is anymore. Maeve Binchy. She was an Irish writer who was really popular probably in like I want to say maybe the 70s and 80s, but what I'm leading up to is that it's like pure family melodrama. Big intertwined Irish family. They all live like in the same within blocks of each other. And it's like almost soap opera. And I used to love those books. I'm trying to think of something more recent that you think of as like, because God knows I got lots of guilty pleasure TV. Let's not even go there.
We are going to go there next. So
but with
get
reading, I'm much more selective about what I read than what I watch. So I'm not trying to evade your question, but my reading time is limited and kind of sacred. So I don't always use that for quote unquote the guilty pleasure. I mean, this is going to sound so unbelievably stupid and pretentious, but for me, it's so true. A guilty pleasure read for me would be to go back and read like Edith Wharton's The House of Mirth for like the fourth time. That would be like guilty pleasure for me. It's like, or to reread Jane Austen. It's like, just do it again, just because it's so wonderful. Read it again. It's like, yeah, but there's so many other books out there. Yeah, but read this one again. That's my idea of guilty pleasure reading, which is very different from guilty pleasure viewing.
What's your guilty pleasure show?
Well, just like so many. Like, for example, I loved Virgin River, which is, it's basically, a soap opera in the Pacific Northwest and a love story. And it's not that complicated, but it's so bingeable and I loved it. I think it was based on books.
It was.
I seem to always love the things that it turns out they were based on books. I also really, really loved, you're going to know the name of it. What's the one with Sarah Chalk and Katherine Heigl? About the two of them. Oh, Firefly Lane. And the most recent episode of that. I mean, we're talking like binge central. Like
So, I will
it.
warn you, don't read the books then.
Because why? Because
well, that happens to be one of the shows where they definitely didn't try to take that book all the way forward, if that makes sense. Like I feel like there are shows and movies that take kind of the concept of it, but don't take the meat of the story. Not that you can have the whole entire book in there, right? But you can definitely take parts of it that do, to me, more honoring the book versus they took some of the characters, mashed up some of the characters, some of the, things like that. Yeah.
That's interesting. Well, I mean, I cried like a baby on the last episode. So for me, it was really satisfying, I
don't think they did bad. I've gotten over by doing this podcast, really. I've gotten over my whole, like, I want the movie or TV show to be like the book, right? What I've realized is it's never going to be that. And I understand, especially doing more screenwriting and stuff, I understand where you have to mash up things and you have to choose what story in the book you want to tell, right? Because you're not going to tell every little story in a book. There's way too many of them. Unless you get given a TV show, but then you have to get given a TV show where you have more than one season to tell the entire book, because it would probably take for most books 3 seasons to tell the entire book correctly, right? but
Well,
with a lot of boring episodes in between, because
Well-
there's some crap that
yes, we could talk for an hour about how the emotional arc has to change from a book to a movie. Like, I mean, there's things that are both simplified and deepened when you move to a film medium. It's such an interesting transition. So I love What We Do in the Shadows, the vampire.
yeah.
I mean, we just laugh, absolutely laugh out. It's so ridiculously funny. And I have to say that, I mean, years ago, I watched most of the seasons of Doc Martin, and then it sort of disappeared from Easy Free TV. I don't know if you know Doc Martin, the British series. It basically takes place in this quaint seaside village, and it's about a very curmudgeonly doctor who comes to serve the residents. It's one of the most effortlessly funny shows I've ever watched. They just put season 9 on public television for free, so I'm now back to kind of quasi binging that. It's a masterclass in comedy because, as I was saying out loud to my husband, the best comedy is not forced. It's organic, and it comes out of the actual characters. So character-based comedy is so wonderful, and that's what Doc Martin is. It's hilarious because of the people and how they interact with each other. Like, there's not a forced joke in it, and I really admire that. It's very funny.
Oh, doing humor, I always say it is one of the hardest things in the entire world.
Super hard. So
And
hard.
What We Do in the Shadows, to me, is very much like that too, because it's a mockumentary style show,
Right.
but it's so ridiculous that you just go, this is silly. But I think people don't realize what it takes to create a character that comes across as ridiculous as these characters do, because it's not really slapstick, you know what I mean?
Right.
A lot of that humor on that show is how dumb these characters are, like
Right.
just intelligence level, nothing. But it's such a brilliantly written show in characters and stuff. I agree completely.
It
okay,
is.
Bo, you get the final question, my darling.
No pressure or anything. What is your desert island book if you had to have one book to read for the rest of your life?
It's just my knee-jerk answer to that is going to be almost anything by Jane Austen. It just is.
Which one was your favorite? We talked about this, though. You did have a favorite.
I honestly, I'll just confess, I've been using passages from her books to teach, but I haven't reread her now in several years because I keep forcing myself to try to read new stuff, right? I mean, we could all just live in Austen land and that would be an end to it.
I know you'd love to live. I wouldn't want to live there. I'm going to live somewhere else, but we'll chit chat over the fence.
Yeah. But so no, I mean, I can't pick one. I mean, I do think that Sense and Sensibility and Pride and Prejudice are, probably the masterpieces. But frankly, if you just literally stuck, maybe Sanditon, which you didn't finish, if you stuck any of them in my hands, I would be on that desert island. I'd be happy. But then again, I remember there was a time in my life where I read The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann like 3 times, and I haven't read that in probably 40 years. Maybe I should be stuck with that one again.
Well, here's the thing. I think it's kind of like watching shows over again, because I'll watch, and I'm not, every person's like this, and then we got to wrap up the show, but because we could talk for hours. We know that. Is that I like Bimbos of the Death Sun is my favorite book of all time. It's this little tiny book written by a mystery writer who's talking about a nerd convention way back in the 80s when it really wasn't cool at all. Like, I say it now and people are like, convention, and I'm like, no, this was like in the basement of a hotel that they didn't really even put a sign on the marquee because that's how nerdy it was. But I love every now and then just going back and reading it because I re-experience all the emotions and things that I love about that book. So I'm just going to say I'm an advocate, even with limited time, taking the time to get your comfy sweater with your different buttons and stuff
funky
like
buttons.
that, and funky buttons, and put it back on and wear it. I think you can. So that is my advice. So Amy, shameless self-promotion time.
Anyone who wants to follow up on anything that I said or, fact check me, whatever they want to do, should go to my website, which is amywrites.live, just AMYWRITES.live. Not only can you find my books, but on the happenings tab, you can find out about some of the courses that I'm teaching and probably more about me than you want to know. And a link to my book coaching is there as well.
I was going to say, I don't think that's true. And your latest book, the title, my friend?
The latest book is Dreams of Song Times.
Awesome. You are amazing to have on the show. And when the next one comes out, I insist you come back and continue with us.
I plan to. This is probably the fastest hour that I've ever spent, and it's been absolutely fun and delightful. And thank you so much for having me back on.
Of course. We just love having you here. This has been Drinking with Authors. I've been your host, Erica Lance. My co-host today has been Bo Lake. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, review, yell at the podcast, and tell Amy that she said the title wrong. Totally fine. All of these things at the same time. Our guest has been Amy Bernstein, and we will see you guys next time.